It was an early spring morning in Paris when I first met Lilo, a dog whose story would become intertwined with mine in ways I never could have predicted. I was volunteering at a small, local zoo that had recently taken in a polar bear cub, and I'd often find myself drawn to the outside world during my breaks, away from the clatter of the animal care team and the stress of the cub's delicate health. One of those mornings, I found myself walking through a charming neighborhood park, a small but lively green space tucked between rows of cafes and cobblestone streets. The park had always been peaceful, with Parisians enjoying their coffee and the birds taking shelter in the trees. That day, however, the park was busy with a different kind of energy. The pigeons were unusually agitated, their wings fluttering wildly as they took flight, a sense of danger looming in the air. I looked around, trying to figure out what was going on, when I saw her. Lilo. She was a scrappy street dog, skinny, with matted fur and a look of someone who had survived more than a few battles. At first glance, she looked like she didn't belong in this place, but as I watched her, something caught my attention. Lilo wasn't chasing the pigeons, as you might expect from a stray dog in a busy park. No, she was standing vigil, her eyes scanning the park with a determined focus. A few seconds later, I saw it. A sleek tabby cat, slinking from behind a park bench, its eyes fixed on one of the pigeons. The cat was poised to pounce, a silent predator ready to strike. Before I could even process what was happening, Lilo reacted. With surprising agility, Lilo dashed toward the cat, her body moving with a speed and precision that seemed to defy her scruffy appearance. The cat, startled by the sudden intervention, hesitated for just a moment, and that was enough. Lilo barked sharply, a commanding sound that echoed through the park. The cat froze, eyes wide, before turning and bolting into the nearby bushes. The pigeons, who had scattered in panic, now began to return to the trees, their feathers ruffling in the wind as they resumed their quiet lives. And Lilo? She stood tall and proud, looking back over her shoulder as if to make sure her job was done. At first, I thought it was just a fluke. Maybe Lilo had just had a lucky encounter, or perhaps it was the cat that had backed down for other reasons. But as I continued to observe her over the next few weeks, I saw it again and again. Lilo wasn't just a random dog passing through, she had found her purpose. She was protecting the pigeons. The neighborhood began to notice her, too. People would gather on the benches, watching in amazement as Lilo patrolled the park, keeping the pigeons safe from cats, or any other animals that might pose a threat. Children would laugh and clap when she successfully chased off a cat, and elderly park-goers would nod approvingly, amused by the sight of this unassuming protector. But no one really knew her story. No one knew the pain she'd endured before she came to this park. It took me a while to piece it together, but eventually, I learned from a local animal rescue group that Lilo had been a stray for years before finding the park. She had been abandoned as a puppy in the outskirts of Paris, where she roamed the streets, searching for food, and avoiding any harm. Her survival instincts were sharp, much sharper than most dogs who spent their days with families or in homes. And now, in this quiet neighborhood park, she had found a new purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was protecting the fragile balance of life in her little corner of Paris. One day, as I sat on a park bench, watching Lilo chase off yet another cat, I couldn't help but think about how extraordinary it was that this street dog had become a hero in her own right. She didn't wear a cape or have a dramatic backstory, she was simply a dog who cared. It wasn't the kind of heroism that made the news or caught the attention of the world, but in that little neighborhood park, she was the undisputed champion. But Lilo's story was far from over. Her journey as the pigeon defender was just beginning, and what I had witnessed that morning was only a glimpse of the remarkable bond that would form between her, the pigeons, and the people who loved her. As the weeks passed, Lilo became a fixture in the park, her reputation spreading beyond the neighborhood. I watched as more and more people came to observe her, intrigued by the way she seemed to understand her role so intuitively. Her interaction with the pigeons was gentle, almost respectful, a delicate balance that contrasted sharply with the sharp, calculated attacks of the cats she so steadfastly repelled. One day, as I arrived at the park, I noticed something different. Lilo wasn't pacing back and forth near the trees, as usual. Instead, she was lying quietly on the ground, her eyes scanning the area as always, but her body was still, almost like a sentry. A few pigeons, having grown accustomed to her presence, were calmly pecking at the ground just a few feet away from her. It was as though they trusted her completely. I approached cautiously, wondering what had happened. Had she grown tired of her self-imposed duties? Or perhaps, I thought, something had shifted in the park. As I sat on a bench, I noticed that a large tabby cat was lurking at the edge of the park. It wasn't acting quite like the others, its eyes were fixed on Lilo, sizing her up rather than the pigeons. Suddenly, without warning, the cat charged, a blur of fur and claws. Lilo sprang into action instantly. With an astonishing burst of energy, she intercepted the cat, her sharp bark cutting through the quiet air. The cat hesitated just long enough for Lilo to outmaneuver it, darting to the side and cutting off its escape route. The cat, startled by Lilo's speed and determination, skidded to a halt, uncertain of how to proceed. But this time, it wasn't just a cat Lilo was chasing off. This was a larger threat, an invader that hadn't been around the park before. As the cat continued to size her up, Lilo didn't just chase it away, she cornered it, backing it slowly toward the park's boundary. What happened next was nothing short of a miracle. The cat, realizing it was outmatched, suddenly crouched low, its body tense. It was about to strike when something unexpected occurred. Another dog, a scruffy terrier who had been wandering around the park, bolted toward the scene. But instead of attacking Lilo or the cat, the terrier barked loudly, and the tabby, seeing the numbers against it, bolted into the bushes without another thought. I watched, astonished. Lilo, despite her quiet and solitary nature, had found an unexpected ally. It wasn't just the pigeons she was protecting anymore, she had gained the support of other animals in the park, dogs, cats, even people, who had begun to see her as something more than just a stray. As time went on, Lilo's role as the pigeon defender evolved into something even greater. People who had once seen her as an outsider now regarded her with reverence. The locals would drop by just to say hello, sometimes bringing treats or giving her a pat on the head. Children would wave to her as they walked to school, and tourists, unfamiliar with the quiet little corner of Paris, would stop to take photos of the dog with the pigeons. I could sense that Lilo's bond with the pigeons was more than just protection, it was something deeper. She had become part of their world, and they had become part of hers. She would sit beneath the trees, her eyes scanning the horizon, but there was always a calmness to her now, a sense of fulfillment. I had seen the moment when she began to trust, to let her guard down just enough to enjoy the stillness of the park, knowing the pigeons would be safe for the day. But nothing lasts forever, and not everyone in the neighborhood was thrilled by Lilo's newfound fame. One afternoon, a well-dressed man arrived in the park with a sense of purpose, his stern face contrasting sharply with the peaceful scene around him. I overheard him speaking with one of the park attendants. It turned out he was a representative of the city's animal control department, sent to deal with what he deemed a problematic, stray dog who was causing disruptions in the park. The pigeons, the children, the tourists, it was all becoming too much for some people who didn't understand the bond that had formed between Lilo and the community. The news hit like a shockwave. I remember feeling a deep sense of panic wash over me as I thought of what might happen to Lilo. She was, after all, just a stray dog who had no one to speak for her. But the people of the park didn't let that happen. What followed was a wave of support like I had never witnessed before. The local cafe owners, the artists who painted by the park's edge, the elderly who spent their afternoons reading on benches, all of them rallied behind Lilo. Petitions were signed, letters were written to the city council, and the news of Lilo's rescue and protection of the pigeons spread throughout the local media. It wasn't long before the authorities realized that the situation wasn't as simple as they had imagined. In the end, Lilo was allowed to stay in the park. It was decided that she would be part of the neighborhood, respected and loved for the role she had unwittingly taken on. And the pigeons? Well, they remained under her watchful eye, free to roam the park without fear. Years later, as I look back on that time, I'm struck by the simple beauty of Lilo's story. She didn't seek fame or recognition. She didn't ask to be a hero. But somehow, she became one, through nothing more than her natural instinct, her sense of duty, and her ability to care for something other than herself. Lilo the pigeon defender is a legend in that small Paris park, not because she wore a cape or had a heroic title, but because she did what so many of us fail to do. She protected life, no matter how small, and in doing so, found her place in a world that had once been so indifferent to her. Her story reminds me of something I learned when I was caring for the polar bear cub. Sometimes, the most extraordinary things happen when you least expect them. And sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness and protection ripple out and change everything.